In the face of an absolutely diabolical housing and homelessness crisis that sees record numbers of people in this country with nowhere to live, nearly 12,000 now in emergency accommodation, nearly 4,000 children, shamefully. It is even more shameful that, according to the census, we have 166,000 vacant properties, 48,000 of those vacant for 6 years, 23,000 of them vacant since 2011. Will you introduce measures in the budget, tax measures, to deal with this scandal?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Boyd Barrett. As you will be aware, it's long-standing practice of the Minister for Finance not to comment in advance of the budget on taxation matters, certainly in any detail that might be the subject of budget decisions. The Government is acutely aware of the difficulties in the housing market and the challenges this presents for many people and families at the moment. The need to address vacancy and to ensure all viable housing stock is being used is a priority for the Government. In Housing for All, the Government has set out a suite of incentives available to encourage the reuse of properties and increase the supply of housing. Following from a commitment made in Housing for All, a new vacant homes tax was announced in the last budget and was legislated for in the Finance Act of 2022. This tax is only one part of a much wider suite of measures. Housing for All outlines a suite of measures on the pathway forward to address vacancy and efficient use of existing stock. The Minister for Housing launched the Vacant Homes Action Plan in January, which outlines the progress that has been made in addressing vacancy, along with the actions that are being pursued to return as many vacant and derelict properties back to viable use as possible. More recently, the Minister for Housing announced further enhancements to the Vacant Property Refurbishment Grant with the aim of increasing the pace at which vacant and derelict properties are renovated for new housing. This grant is being increased from €30,000 to €50,000 for vacant properties and from €50,000 to €70,000 for derelict properties, extended to cover houses built up to 2007 and will be available for properties intended for rental as well as owner-occupied. In relation to dereliction, I understand the Department of Housing has established a focus working group of local authority officials nominated by the City and County Managers Association to examine the operation of the Derelict Sites Act. It's expected that the report of this group will be finalised shortly and its recommendations will be considered once it is received.
Minister. Deputy Boyd Barrett and then Deputy Gould.
We're a decade into the worst housing crisis this country has ever seen, and the vacant homes tax you have is 0.3%, 3 times the average local property tax rate. The increased wealth that somebody sitting on a derelict or an empty or on a vacant property can make just by sitting on it and paying that derisory tax is multiples of what you're asking them to pay. It doesn't offer any incentive or penalty in real terms for sitting on vacant property. And tens of thousands are doing it. Now, there may be cases where people need assistance, they genuinely have difficulty refurbishing it, so a carrot is fine. But there needs to be a stick to people who are willfully sitting on empty property just watching an asset accumulate in value while others need a home.
No, there's time. Sorry, I do have a kind of a clue of the rules, and there's time allocated for each question. Sorry, I really don't want to have an argument with you about it.
Well, I'm going to have an argument, Cam, because I'm one of the few people who turned up for their questions tonight, and people have come in subbing for other people. That's fine. I didn't say anything about that for the people, all the people who didn't turn up, and then subs run in at the last minute. But then I get shortchanged on when I do turn up for my own question. That's not fair. That is not fair, Cam.
Deputy, you're on your feet fairly frequently.
I know, but I put the question down.
All right, we'll give you time to sit down then. Minister, please.
Thanks very much, Karen Corley. So the tax that I have specific policy responsibility for is the vacant homes tax, and it's a tax that has only just come into being. It is yet to be paid by anyone. We are in the first chargeable period. The returns will be made and the charge will be levied, and the Revenue Commissioners will provide information to me in relation to the operation of that tax, and I'll come to a view as to whether or not we need to change the nature of that tax. I mean, I would make the point it is for habitable properties only. The issue of dereliction is related, but it is a separate matter, and that is why I do very much welcome the focused working group that Minister O'Brien has set up, because I do think that, you know, when you go around the country in towns and villages, we do see too much dereliction. We are providing the carrot now in terms of the grants that are there, but there also has to be a stick that is fully and properly applied, and I think the implementation of that act and that register and the penalty, it appears to be patchy at best around the country. So I'll work with the Minister in relation to that.
I just do want to ask about the stick. I know there are valid reasons sometimes for properties being vacant or derelict, but I'll just give you two quick instances in my area. Directly across from my office, there's a multi-unit apartment complex owned by a vulture fund, where there are 16 perfectly refurbished apartments that have sat empty for about 4 years. And they are doing it purely for commercial reasons. No other reason than that. Pure greed, while people need homes. At the top of another road, just off at York Road, it's called, just off Dunleary. For those who don't know the geography, there's a place sitting there vacant for about 10 years, and when we found out who owned it, we traced it back to a Caribbean tax haven. Okay, now there needs to be a very big stick for people like that, a very big stick, and 0.3% is not a big stick to force these people to bring those properties back into use for people who really need them.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Deputy. I do think that when we get the full data, and having looked at the legitimate exemptions that are provided for in law in terms of the vacant homes tax, the number of people who are directly impacted will not be as high as some are suggesting. And I don't think the yield will be as high as some people might think either, because of the exemptions that are there and they need to be there. So that is just that whole area of habitable properties. But when I look at the derelict sites issue, and I see that the levies collected in 2021 came in at just over €1 million. The amount levied was just over €5 million, so presumably some of the money has yet to come in, or may have come in recent months. I do not think that is a system that's fully working, and that's why I think the working group has a very important task on its hands. We have too much dereliction in Ireland. We have the carrot now. We need to make sure the stick is working too, and I'll do whatever I can in my role.